You still believe. You still call yourself a person of faith. But lately, God feels far. You pray, but it feels mechanical. You read scripture, but it feels flat. Did I do something wrong? Is God disappointed in me? Am I drifting? You still believe. You still call yourself a person of faith. You haven't walked away. But lately, God feels far. Not denied, not rejected, just distant. And that distance unsettles you, because faith used to feel clearer, warmer, more alive, and now it feels quiet. You pray, but it feels mechanical. You read scripture, but it feels flat. You worship, but something inside doesn't move. And quietly you wonder, did I do something wrong? Is God disappointed in me? Am I drifting? If that's where you are, I want you to hear this carefully. You are not spiritually broken, but something is happening. When faith feels distant, most people don't talk about it. They keep showing up. They keep saying the right words. They keep functioning. But internally, there's fear, because distance feels like rejection. We're wired for connection. When someone we love feels far, we assume something is wrong. And without realizing it, we bring that same instinct into our faith. So instead of asking, "What is this season teaching me?" we quietly ask, "Am I losing God?" What makes spiritual distance so unsettling is not just the quiet. It's what we assume the quiet means. We equate closeness with feeling. So when the feeling fades, we assume the relationship is fading. But often something else is happening. Let me describe a familiar scenario. You've been carrying more than you admit. Responsibilities, pressure, expectations, private disappointments. You haven't collapsed. You've stayed functional. But your inner world has been crowded. And when your inner world is crowded, connection becomes harder to sense. Not because God withdrew, but because your soul is overloaded. Sometimes what feels like spiritual distance is emotional depletion. And depletion dulls everything, including spiritual sensitivity. Scripture does not hide this pattern. In Psalm 13, David cries, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? And how long will you hide your face from me?" That's not mild discomfort. That's someone who feels abandoned. And yet David is called a man after God's own heart, which means this: feeling distance did not disqualify him. God preserved those words in Scripture. Honesty about distance exists inside relationship. Distance was not proof of failure. It was part of his formation. In 1 Kings 19, Elijah experiences something many believers quietly live through. He has just seen fire fall from heaven, a dramatic spiritual victory. And immediately afterward, he collapses emotionally. He runs into the wilderness and says, "I have had enough." He feels alone, afraid, finished. What does God do? He doesn't correct him. He feeds him. He lets him sleep. He restores his body. Sometimes what feels like spiritual distance is emotional exhaustion. God addresses Elijah's nervous system before addressing his theology. That matters. Job says something many believers feel but don't voice. "If I go to the east, he is not there, and if I go to the west, I do not find him." He searches. He feels silence. But what the reader knows, and Job doesn't, is that God has not left. The silence is not abandonment. It is part of a story larger than his perception. Silence does not equal absence. It often means you are inside a chapter you cannot yet see clearly. After the resurrection, 2 disciples walk the road to Emmaus in Luke 24. They are discouraged, confused, disappointed. Jesus joins them, walks with them, speaks to them, and they do not recognize him. Imagine that, walking beside God and assuming he isn't there. How many seasons of our lives might feel like that? Distance can sometimes be unrecognized presence. Some saints felt distance, yet were never abandoned. Hagar flees into the wilderness, convinced she is unseen and alone. A voice finds her by a spring. The angel of the Lord calls her by name. She whispers, "You are the God who sees me." Distance felt real. Presence was nearer than breath. Joseph sits forgotten in a cell. Plans erase prayers unanswered. Scripture repeats a quiet refrain. But the Lord was with Joseph. In the place that felt like absence, God was working a story he could not yet see. Daniel is lowered into darkness, stones roll and silence settles. Morning breaks. He calls out, "My God sent his angel." What seemed like forsakenness was guarded by faithfulness. If God felt far for them and was still near, then your quiet may be the same. What feels like distance can be escorted by presence. Silence is not absence, it is accompanied presence. There is a difference between emotional faith and mature faith. Early faith often feels intense, clear, emotionally responsive. Mature faith often feels steadier, quieter, less dependent on sensation. Hebrews 11 describes people who trusted God without always seeing visible results. It says, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised." Faith in Scripture is not defined by intensity. It is defined by trust. You can feel distant and still be deeply faithful. What if this quiet season is not decline, but deepening? What if God is shifting you from emotional dependence to rooted trust? Roots grow underground, quiet, unseen, unfelt. You don't feel them expanding, but they are strengthening you. Silence in Scripture is never meaningless. Between promise and fulfillment, there was waiting. Between prayer and answer, there was stillness. Silence is often preparation. So instead of asking, "Why does God feel far?" try asking, "What part of me is tired? What pressure have I normalized? What emotion have I not processed? Have I been surviving more than resting?" If faith feels distant right now, don't panic. Slow down, not to perform better, but to listen better. You might pray something simple. "God, I don't feel close, but I trust you are near. Restore what feels weary. Help me rest instead of striving." A healthy life after God's own heart is not constant emotional intensity. It is steady alignment. And alignment sometimes grows in quiet seasons. If you're in a season where faith feels distant, you are not alone. You are standing in a long line of faithful people who walked through silence and came out steadier. In the next video, we'll talk about something closely connected to this: why you can deeply trust God and still struggle with anxiety. Remember, God's nearness is not measured by your emotions. It is anchored in His faithfulness.